The sun is shining. Looks like we have a little bit of a swell, just enough to keep it real. Very exciting. So let's talk about criticism, shall we? How many of you have ever been criticized? How many of you breathe oxygen on a regular basis? There is a correlation. Okay, so a while ago, years and years ago, I wrote a book, and the publisher, without telling me, because I've never done like endorsements where you get somebody to put a blurb on the back, I'd never done endorsements, and my publisher, without telling me, sent the book to one of my heroes for an endorsement. My publisher then emails me and says, I sent a manuscript, an early draft of the book to so-and-so for them to write a blurb, because we think it would be just huge. And I was like, and he says, so I'm forwarding you their response, but I just need to warn you, they're a little competitive. So I'll never forget sitting at my desk and reading that email, and this hero of mine shredded the book. Shredded. Pow, 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 first paragraph. Pow. That sucker had been thought out. It was like structured takedown. I'll never forget. I will never forget. Third paragraph, first line. This book makes me sad. Period. And so basically, no, I will not put my name or endorse this book. And I'll never forget just reading it and just, you know that feeling, like that warm, numb, sort of hazy feeling when you've been kicked in the stomach? Just sort of, I remember getting up from my desk and like taking a lap through the house, sitting back down, reading it again, standing back up, taking a lap through the house, like, you know that like flushed cheeks? How many of you, when somebody angers you or criticizes you, you feel it in your face first? Yeah. Does anybody have hot face?
Oh, hot face.
Anybody have limbs go weak? Yeah, isn't that interesting that there's like something about that experience has a direct physiological. Is anybody here immediately, you just get cranked up and start talking and you make no sense, but you have something to say? Yeah, well, your mom. I mean, this. And I remember I called a friend of mine and I was like, you wouldn't believe what I just got. I just got an email from so-and-so who like shredded, and my friend's like, I never liked that guy. That guy's a dick. Oh, so funny. So, kind of. But not at the time. So then I read through it again. So like by the third read, and here's what's interesting. This whole section was, you misspelled that Greek word, and everybody knows it's spelled like this. Well, actually, the word has lots of conjugations, and actually it was a typo because this was an early draft. And in a typo, you never, like in an early draft or something, you always skip over those kinds of things, because that'll happen with 9 layers of copy editing, which this person knows. Oh. It was like, wait, that whole section is actually about this minute detail that would be taken care of in a different process. Okay, this whole thing is basically saying, this person was saying, I've already dealt with that conclusively. All this is a rehash of my dealing with this. But I actually am aware of how this person spoke about that issue. And when I heard them spoke about it, what I thought is, I don't think their perspective actually is that helpful and actually does give people a way to think. I think they are unable to live with a both and they've made an either or here. So actually, part of the book was in some way, I'm now realizing, addressing what I thought was an inadequacy in how they addressed it. Then there was this whole section that was like, if you're going to deal with this, you have to deal with X and Y, or a majority of readers coming from X perspective are going to be like, how can you leave that out? Point well played. I probably should add a bit about, now I know some would say this about that. Well, so fair game there. Well done. And then this whole section was actually, this sounds, at first this didn't make any sense because it was like, this is just warmed over, da 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 da, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh, this person fought a battle early in their formative years over this particular topic. And they believed they won and that their perspective prevailed in a world where these sorts of things matter. And they are basically saying to me, you're just a young, fresher, hipper version of this old thing that I conquered years ago. Which isn't true, but because I used this word, it triggered a whole giant world of debate and discussion from this thing that they dealt with 40 whatever years ago, probably before I was born. It was like, oh, this is like a personal thing that happened a long time ago that has very little to do with me. I just sound like a new version of an old bad idea. And I know that bad old idea, and that bad old idea had some things in it that were very powerful and need to be reclaimed. So actually, on like third or fourth read, gradually, almost like you got a highlighter pen, you start to go, okay, that part, ignore, that has nothing to do with you. That part right there, really helpful. Like they're giving you a gift here about how to make this better. And there were probably 2 or 3 of those where it's like, wow, if I addressed those. So, and they had sent it to the editor, assuming it would never see me. But their email was in the little link thing there. So I sent him an email. Dear so-and-so, thank you so much for the helpful critique. I am making a number of changes based on your wisdom and insight in my goal to create a book you would have wished you endorsed. Thank you. The goal with all criticism is to become a non-reactive presence. That's the goal here. That's the big picture. The big picture is that you're in a non-reactive presence. That you can take it and you don't immediately start throwing punches because you don't know in that split second when it first comes your way what else is in the rooms. So we'll explore that. First, let me back up. When I was 31, 32, we had started a church, and I did a series of teachings on the equality of women, that women should be free to be whoever God made them to be. And those women's teachings, you were there, right?
Yeah.
Spring of 02, spring of 03.
02, yeah.
And I did these teachings, and there were people who didn't really think that was a good idea, and especially men who got extremely emotional, saying women can't lead because they're too emotional. It's just bizarre. It's just bizarre. So I did a series of Tuesday night teachings on this, and people came from like all over. It was like a circus. People were like driving from other states, and on the last night, they put microphones in the aisle. Don't ever do that, ever. Just have people shout out their question. You give somebody a microphone in public with a cause, not good. And I sat on a stool all alone, and people, were you there that night? This is my friend Mark Boss, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Mark Boss. And he, and then people could come to the aisle and just say what they think. And it turned into like, just, like they would say, unbelievable, you are an apostate and a heretic, you have turned from the, people would come shaking with a speech they prepared. And so I just sort of stood there, and we didn't at the time have the maturity, structure, or cojones to understand how you go about talking about these sorts of things, especially in like and it was a new church, so everything was sort of fluid anyway. And that I remember that night in specific, and then a group of people within the church that I had started formed a group within themselves to have my ordination papers revoked. Ooh. Now I can't do anything. I actually didn't even know what that meant. And later they're like, that means that you wouldn't be able to be the pastor. And I was like, but But what if I just say, so? That's why I started something new, so there wouldn't be some committee in the back room that could be like, gotcha. It was just all complete ridiculous, school of ridiculousness. And then there was then a book came out in '05 that seemed to, called Velvet Elvis, that seemed to, people were like, and then there was like a sermon series about the Iraq War at Christmas time, which apparently people want I call them sweater sermons at Christmas time. Tell me something warm and comforting that I already know. Don't talk to me about the U.S. defense budget. That didn't go over that well. And then there was, then in 2011, there was a book called Love Wins, which was very unique in the history of publishing because everybody who read it liked it. So by 2005, 2006, I couldn't go anywhere in the town that we lived in Michigan without running into somebody who had left the church or who had family members who had left the church who had been openly critical. So the grocery store, the gas station, your kid's ball game, it would inevitable there would be somebody. The church that I had worked at when I first started as a pastor wrote a series of treatises against me, like 11-page single-space typed why I'm wrong. Probably my closest pastor friend in town, his church wrote a whole piece about me and how dangerous I was, which I think is, like, how do you even begin to rationally start deciding who you're going to write papers against? You know what I mean? Like, do you have a problem if you didn't write a paper against Mein Kampf? Right? So you're against me before Hitler? No, we're against Hitler, but you didn't write a paper against him. It's just like, how do you even go down, you know what I mean? How do you all of a sudden pick that? Unless it reveals something you're terrified is true about yourself. So that was like a way, then there were protesters, like when you go out on tour, there'd be guys out front with signs, and you'd order them pizza, and that got fun. So that was a normal thing. I remember in Belfast, Northern Ireland, we were on tour in the summer of '07, and my wife was in a store with our young sons, who would have been 7 and 9 years old, and there were flyers, she's going to buy something, and there's a big stack of flyers at the cash register saying that I'm a spawn of Satan or something very creative. And the woman realizes when Kristen gives her the credit card or something who she's selling something to, and the woman says, "It's Belfast. We're always protesting something."
That was awesome.
So anyway, that just became a normal part of life, but I didn't ever find it interesting because I never set out. And we'll talk about the Great Clarifier in a minute, but I never set out to prove to religious people that I'm orthodox enough. So that was never the goal. So proving that I could mention enough Bible verses was never the thing I was trying to do. I was always interested in talking to people who weren't listening. So the thing is, I didn't really do lots of like meetings and, let me hear your heart so that I can try to show you that that wasn't really ever interesting to me because I'm not trying to win you over, because if you have that critique, that's not, that's an example of why I think the system is completely screwed up. Your critique reaffirms my fact. This is why people don't like the story you're telling. So that's a very general statement, but it was just never interesting to me. So this is what we lived with a lot. So by the time I got that letter or that email, this was just a long string of this sort of thing. Now, first off, in dealing with criticism, what else is in the room? The first thing to always ask is what else is in the room. When that person brings that critique, you make a massive mistake if you first off take exactly what they're saying and try to address that, because you can go after their particular question and completely miss what the question is behind the question. So do not defend yourself. First impulse is never to defend. First impulse is always to begin asking questions to make sure that you're actually going to address the issue behind the issue. What is the question behind the question? What is the critique behind the critique? What is the fear behind the fear? What is the issue behind the issue? Otherwise, they come to you and they say, we are so upset about how the second quarter report was communicated, and you say, well, we had a 4-step process, but what they actually want to know is, are you committed to this company for a long term? And so you charge down a process question about, well, this is how we thought about doing it, when they're actually, the way that you communicated it triggered for them a bad experience they had at the company before this, involving the quarterly reports and how it's reported, and they're really asking a larger question of, can you be trusted and are you committed to us, or are you going to take the money and run like that person? Make sense? So oftentimes you'll notice somebody's like, well, actually, and they charge into the policy or the procedure or the whatever the clarifying point is, and they're missing completely that this person's question is somewhere else. They just didn't realize that was their question, and they used language up here. Now, sometimes the truth is you threw the first punch. So there is explicit critique and there is implicit critique. Explicit critique is, I think you're terrible and you did it wrong. That is explicit critique. The way that you said that is not true. It is an error. It is not factual. It is a gross injustice. That is explicit critique. Implicit critique is, there's the mothership, whatever it is, institution, company, and a group of people said, I think we could do this a little better. And they go down the street, around the corner, and they rent a little cheap office space, and they get a couple desks and computer together, and they start trying to do it differently. And their office doesn't look like their office, and their company vision isn't the same as the mothership country, and they're organizing themselves slightly differently, and they have a little different way of working. And what inevitably happens is every move that make, if it's not the same way it was done here, looks like it's a critique of this thing. Make sense? So you're just following the impulse. You're just doing it how you think it ought to be done. But back there, if they're not totally grounded and secure in who they are and what they're doing, every move you make looks like it's basically saying, we figured out a way to do it better. And so sometimes people are being shot at, there are snipers on every roof, and they're like, all we're doing is trying to make it better, trying to listen to what people want, trying to innovate here, and the mothership is just firing shot after shot. It's because if you aren't totally grounded in who you are, their thing feels like a critique because they're not doing it how you've always done it. This happens in business, religion, politics. You see it all the time. And this person's like, what? What'd I do? What you did is you did it differently.